He came home from the war, but something else came with him. When Deathdream premiered in 1974, audiences expected another low-budget horror flick about a returning soldier. What they got was something colder, quieter, and much more unsettling. It wasn't just a zombie story, it was a slow-motion collapse of an American household wrapped in the still-fresh trauma of the Vietnam War. Directed by Bob Clark, who would later helm Black Christmas and A Christmas Story, Deathdream is a film that doesn't scream, it seeps. It adapts W.W. Jacobs' classic short story, The Monkey's Paw, but swaps Victorian dread for post-war dread. Instead of a cursed wish gone wrong, we get a family who wish their son alive and watch their world rot from the inside out. What makes this film strange isn't just its premise, it's the way it unfolds. From the moment Andy appears on the porch without a scratch, to the final, haunting scene in the cemetery, Deathdream builds its horror, not through gore, but through silence, stillness, and the slow peeling away of sanity. Behind the camera, things were even stranger. Medical emergencies, lost recordings, unplanned blood effects, and a final scene whose audio refused to behave. This was a production haunted in more ways than one. These aren't just facts about a forgotten zombie film. These are ruptures, quiet, creeping glitches in the frame of American horror. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Deathdream. 1974. Fact: Hasson, the first death was real. The film opens on a dusty battlefield. A U.S. soldier is gunned down in slow motion, his body twisting unnaturally before collapsing. It's brutal, haunting, and according to the crew, disturbingly convincing. That's because actor Richard Backus, who played Andy, momentarily lost consciousness during the first take. The director had instructed the actors to use real blank rounds, which, while not lethal, still produced heat, smoke, and unexpected recoil. When a blank misfired near Backus's head, he collapsed. The camera kept rolling. Crew members thought it was acting. It wasn't. Paramedics were called, and Backus later recounted that he had blacked out for over 30 seconds. That take, the one where he drops, limbs stiff, like a marionette with its strings cut, is the one in the final film. Was it a mistake? A moment of method gone too far? Or did the film, from its first frame, already blur the line between fiction and something more dangerous? Fact: 2. The letter scene was almost cut for being too quiet. After the chaos of the war zone, the film cuts to a suburban dining room where Andy's family receives the letter, "We regret to inform you." It's one of the most chilling scenes, not because of violence, but because of stillness. No music, no reaction shots, just silence. That wasn't in the script. Bob Clark instructed the actors to play the entire scene without blinking, without speaking, and without even breathing too loudly. Mary Jackson, who played the mother, said it was the hardest acting I ever had to do. She blinked only once. Producers hated it. They called the scene anti-cinematic, but test audiences found it unforgettable, so unnerving that it caused a few walkouts. One viewer wrote in their comment card, "This is what real grief feels like. I never want to feel it again." To this day, it's studied in film schools not for what it shows, but for what it dares not to. Fact: 3. Andy's return was shot without the actor. In one of the film's eeriest moments, Andy suddenly appears on the family's porch late at night, silent and pale. But here's what no one tells you. Richard Backus wasn't there when they filmed that scene. Scheduling conflicts had delayed his arrival by 2 days. The solution? A stand-in wrapped in shadow, wearing Andy's uniform, entered the porch while the family acted their shocked reactions. The close-up of Andy's face was inserted later, filmed separately with Backus under different lighting. The result? A strangely disjointed moment. Andy looks both present and absent, real and unreal. Viewers often say there's something off about that first glimpse of him. They're not wrong. It's the wrong man, in the wrong light, with the right kind of ghostliness. Fact: 4. The dog didn't fake it. Soon after Andy returns, the family dog begins barking uncontrollably until it doesn't. The next morning, it's dead. The film never shows how. But the way the dog reacts to Andy growling, then howling, then silence wasn't scripted. The animal trainer on set insisted the German Shepherd used was highly trained. But when filming the confrontation scene, the dog refused to stop barking at Richard Backus, even off camera. The director loved it. He quietly told the crew, "Don't cut. Keep it wild." During the next take, the dog lunged just out of frame and had to be restrained. The terrified reaction from the actor playing the father wasn't acting. It was self-preservation. The trainer later admitted, "That wasn't a performance, that was fear. The dog saw something in him we didn't." To this day, animal behaviorists cite that footage as an example of instinct overriding training. Fact #5. The mirror scene had to be reshot. Because the camera stopped working, in a dimly lit bathroom, Andy stares into the mirror. He hasn't spoken. He hasn't blinked. Slowly, he runs his hand over his reflection, as if unsure of what he's seeing. That scene was filmed 3 times because each time, something went wrong. On the first attempt, the sound recorder failed. On the second, the mirror cracked from the heat of the set lights. And on the third, the camera reportedly jammed mid-take, despite being inspected moments before. Cinematographer Jack McGowan later said, "It was the only time I felt like the film didn't want to be filmed. They eventually got the shot, but something was off." When played back, Andy's reflection seemed to move half a second out of sync with his real motion. They dismissed it as a transfer error and left it in. Watch closely. The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't obey either. Fact #6. The dinner scene was filmed backwards. There's a chilling moment early in Andy's return when the family sits down to dinner. Andy doesn't eat, he just stares. The others pretend it's fine. But something about the rhythm is wrong. Subtle pauses, awkward breathing, strange eyeline. That's because the entire scene was filmed in reverse. Bob Clark had the actors film their dialogue backwards, line by line, so it could be played forward in editing, but with unnatural cadences. The goal was to make viewers uncomfortable without knowing why. It worked. Audiences reported feeling nauseated by the scene but couldn't explain why. Editors later admitted that syncing the reversed audio to lip movements was nearly impossible, so they left subtle gaps, intentionally, to enhance the unease. It's a scene about pretending everything is normal while every fiber of the frame insists it's not. Fact #7. The first night out was shot with no crew present. Andy's first nocturnal disappearance happens without explanation. The film simply cuts to the next morning. His mother asks where he went. He doesn't answer, but there was supposed to be a full sequence showing Andy walking through the neighborhood, staring into windows, drifting like a sleepwalker. Bob Clark filmed it, but he did something unusual. He sent the crew home and shot the sequence himself with a handheld Bolex camera and just one assistant. No lights, no setup. Just Richard Backus wandering the streets in full costume. Clark said he wanted to capture the feeling of a ghost passing through suburbia. The footage they got was grainy, shaky, and almost unusable, but in one frame, a neighbor is seen staring straight into the lens, mouth open. The shot was pulled, but legend says that neighbor later reported seeing someone outside their house that night, someone they couldn't identify, even after seeing the film. Fact #8. The needle scene was so graphic it was reported to the police. In a basement scene that comes without warning, Andy attacks a delivery driver and injects him with a syringe to extract blood. The scene is quiet, no music, just breath and panic. The effect is so realistic that a crew member vomited during filming. Special effects artist Alan Ormsby used a prosthetic arm for the close-up, but for the wide shot, the needle went into a real, consenting stuntman's vein. No blood was drawn, but the movement was real. A neighbor who overheard the filming called the police. When they arrived, the crew had to replay the footage to prove it wasn't an actual assault. The officer reportedly said, "I've seen real things that looked less real than this." The footage was nearly censored, but Clark insisted it stay. "This is the moment," he said, "where Andy stops being undead and becomes something else." Fact #9. The car scene was added after a real accident. After the delivery man disappears, the town doctor becomes suspicious. He visits the Brooks house, only to find Andy cold, evasive, and increasingly threatening. That tension was supposed to build slowly, but something changed the schedule. On the day they were set to film a different sequence, the car carrying the actor playing the doctor was rear-ended en route to set. Though uninjured, the actor arrived visibly shaken. Bob Clark rewrote the scene on the spot. They now filmed the entire confrontation inside a car, with the actor's hands still trembling. The fear wasn't acted, and Clark, ever opportunistic, told Backus to lean into it, stare longer, speak slower, like you're watching the man's soul leave. The result is a strangely claustrophobic scene. The dialogue stutters, the eyes dart. And it all started with an accident, not in the script, but absolutely in the film. Fact #0. The doctor's death was shot in one take because they couldn't recreate it. When the town doctor returns to confront Andy, the encounter turns deadly. Andy lunges, and the camera cuts to the doctor collapsing, blood trailing from his throat. It's fast, brutal, and shockingly quiet. What's rarely mentioned is that the entire kill was captured in a single take because every attempt to recreate it failed. They used a retractable blade and a pressurized blood pack hidden beneath the actor's shirt. On the first take, the mechanism worked too well. Blood sprayed higher than expected, hitting the lens. The actor's body dropped out of frame awkwardly, but the expression of shock was perfect. They tried to reshoot it 4 times. Each time, something went wrong. Delayed effects, mismatched timing, broken tubing. Finally, Clark said, "Forget it, the messy one stays." The result is oddly disturbing because it doesn't feel rehearsed. It feels like a mistake no one recovered from. Fact Hasanone, Andy's skin rot was made from bread mold. As the film progresses, Andy's face begins to sag, his hands discolor, his voice changes. Viewers often credit this to clever makeup, but they're only half right. Special effects artist Alan Ormsby used real, cultivated mold to create the texture on Andy's skin, specifically penicillium spores grown on white bread. He mixed them with latex and glycerin, applying the gooey substance to Bacchus's neck and cheeks in layers. By day 3 of filming, the mold was alive. The smell was unbearable, and Bacchus developed a mild rash. He reportedly said, "I didn't need to act like I was decomposing, I was." Later in the shoot, they switched to synthetic materials, but not before locking in several close-ups of the real thing. To this day, those frames remain some of the only instances where actual fungal decay was used in makeup effects for a human character. Fact Hasson 2, the police interrogation was improvised and nearly got the actor fired. Suspicion mounts. A local officer visits the Brooks house, questioning Andy about the missing doctor. The scene plays like a slow-burning threat until Andy turns voice hollow. "I don't know what you're talking about." That line? Not in the script, and neither was most of the scene. Richard Bacchus and the actor playing the officer, John Marley, were told to improvise the entire exchange with only one instruction: "One of you is hiding a body." Midway through the take, Marley reportedly broke character and asked Bacchus directly, "Are you okay, man?" confusing the crew, who thought the scene had ended. But Clark yelled, "Keep rolling." The discomfort in Marley's eyes wasn't acting. He later admitted, "I thought the kid had lost it." Studio execs were furious and wanted the scene cut, saying it made the film feel too real. Clark refused. "That's the point," he said. "It's not horror, it's denial with a heartbeat." Fact Hasson 3, the fight with the father was so intense, the boom mic operator fled the room. As the pressure builds, Andy's father, played by John Marley, finally confronts his son in the garage. The confrontation turns physical, culminating in a disturbing moment where Andy grabs his father by the throat, lifts him, and pins him against a wall. What audiences didn't know is that the fight wasn't choreographed. Bob Clark had instructed both actors to escalate naturally and to not pull punches unless someone says cut. Bacchus, immersed in the role, grabbed Marley with more force than expected, slamming him into a support beam. The boom mic operator, a young crew member on his first feature, panicked and ran out of the room, convinced a real fight had broken out. The mic feed was lost halfway through the take. What you hear in the final cut is reconstructed sound, but the image is real. The fear in Marley's eyes? Genuine. Clark later joked, "It was the first time in my career that a mic operator got scared into quitting mid-shot." Fact Hasson 4, Andy's decomposition was speeding up because the makeup was actually rotting. By the third act, Andy's appearance becomes unmistakably corpse-like. His skin flakes, eyes sink, lips dry out. What viewers see as makeup was, in part, organic material undergoing real decay. Alan Ormsby had used a combination of gelatin, meat-based adhesives, and powdered food dye to create the deteriorating look. Under hot set lights, these elements began to spoil rapidly, emitting a sulfur-like odor and attracting flies by day's end. Richard Bacchus described it as wearing someone else's nightmare on your face. He refused to eat during lunch breaks while in full prosthetics and began having allergic reactions to the materials. By the time they shot the cemetery sequence, the crew was using air fresheners and masks just to remain on set. Several close-ups were filmed with a doubled frame rate to mask the writhing insects caught crawling along Andy's jawline. No one wanted to reapply the makeup, so Clark told the team, "Let it rot. That's the point." Fact Hasson 5, one scene was cut because the studio called it un-American. In a deleted scene filmed late in the production, Andy is shown breaking into a neighbor's house not to attack, but to stare at a family photo of a soldier in uniform. He then salutes the photo and walks away. The scene was cut before the first screening. Producers at the time felt the moment painted Andy, an undead veteran, as a sympathetic, even tragic figure. One executive reportedly said, "We don't need another anti-war metaphor, we need a monster." Clark disagreed. He believed the scene was the emotional heart of the film. But in 1974, with the Vietnam War still fresh, the implication that soldiers were being sent home broken physically or otherwise was too much. The footage still exists, in Clark's personal archive, but has never been officially released. It remains one of the film's quietest and most haunting casualties removed, not for violence, but for meaning. Fact X, the final death was modeled on a real funeral Clark attended. As the film spirals toward its conclusion, Andy kidnaps his mother and drives to the cemetery. There, under flickering lights and eerie silence, he climbs into his own grave, his body finally breaking down. This haunting final sequence wasn't just poetic, it was personal. Bob Clark once revealed that the imagery was directly inspired by a funeral he had attended as a child, where a World War II veteran had been buried during a thunderstorm. Clark recalled watching the widow clutch the folded flag while lightning illuminated the casket being lowered into the earth. He described it as, "The first time I realized the dead don't stay dead in the people they leave behind." On set, the cemetery scene was shot over 3 nights, using real fog machines and a prop coffin filled with cold gel to simulate decay. Richard Backus was so cold during filming that his teeth chattered audibly on the audio track. Those sounds were later replaced with silence and wind, but if you listen closely, some say you can still hear faint gasps or whispers. Fact 7. The grave was real, and it was already occupied. The cemetery used for the film was a small, privately owned burial ground in Central Florida. The crew was granted access on the condition that they respect certain plots, specifically a row of World War II veterans buried near the tree line. The grave Andy descends into at the end, it wasn't a set, it was a real, unused grave, dug for a man who had died but whose family hadn't yet scheduled the burial. That detail was discovered after filming wrap. When the cemetery staff returned to prepare the grave, they found that part of the soil had collapsed and that the sides of the grave were smeared with makeup residue and latex from the prosthetics used on Backus. The family insisted the plot be changed. The original grave remains empty. Locals refer to it as the Hollywood Hole. Fact 8. The final sound mix changed itself. In the final seconds of Deathdream, Andy lies motionless as his mother sobs above him. The screen fades to black. Over this, the faint hum of wind and crickets is heard. But in some versions, there's something else, a low, glitching hum, followed by a metallic ringing, like broken radio static. That wasn't in the script, or the original sound mix. When the audio was finalized for theatrical release, the editor discovered that the master tape had a distortion in the last 12 seconds, a kind of warping that hadn't been present during prior mixes. They tried to correct it. Each time they re-exported the film, the distortion returned. Eventually, they left it in, chalking it up to analog tape degradation. But here's where it gets stranger. In digital restorations of the film decades later, the same distortion persists. Even when pulled from different sources, no one can explain it. No other part of the soundtrack behaves this way. One sound engineer called it a signal that doesn't want to be erased. Another said, "It's not a glitch, it's a memory." Fact Hashonanen, audience members passed out during the first screening and it wasn't from gore. At the film's premiere in 1974, the theater was only half full. No major press, no red carpet. But within the first hour, 3 people fainted. It didn't happen during any scene of violence. It happened during the quiet moments, the mirror, the silence at dinner, the moment Andy cradles his own body in the grave. A nurse present that evening said, "They didn't scream, they just slumped over, like the energy left them." One man had to be revived in the lobby. When asked what had happened, he reportedly replied, "It wasn't the movie. It was the space between the scenes." The projectionist later refused to screen the film again. He claimed that during playback, the reels made a faint, rhythmic thumping sound, like a heartbeat, but off. To this day, the original print of that premiere screening has never been found. It went missing from the distributor's archive and has yet to resurface. Fact 20. The final edit was locked without the director's approval. Most directors fight for their cut. Bob Clark did not. By the end of Deathdream, he had stopped attending the editing sessions altogether. He reportedly told producers, "It's not my film anymore. It belongs to whatever we conjured." The final version that went to theaters included changes he hadn't authorized longer, silences, altered fades, and a rearranged audio mix for the final 5 minutes. Clark never commented publicly on these alterations, but privately referred to the release as the dead version. What's more unsettling is that no one remembers making those changes. Editors denied touching the timeline. The sound department insisted the final reel was identical to the locked version weeks earlier. Yet clearly, something shifted. Years later, Clark was asked if he'd ever revisit the film with a director's cut. He replied, "You can't re-edit a ghost." Bonus fact: the frame that shouldn't exist. In 2002, a film archivist working on a digital restoration of Deathdream discovered something anomalous. While scrubbing through the 4 Kelvin scan, frame by frame, he noticed that at exactly 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 47 seconds, there was a single frame, a blink, and it didn't match the scene before or after. It wasn't part of the original reel, it wasn't listed in the shooting script, and no one had seen it before. The frame showed a photo, grainy, desaturated, and off-center. A young man, in military fatigues, standing beside a body bag, smiling at the camera. Behind him, a chalkboard with a date, the 6th of March 1972. The problem? That date was 3 months before principal photography began. They pulled the original negative. The frame wasn't there. It only appeared in the digital scan like a glitch that had been waiting for the right resolution to emerge. Technicians tried to replicate it. Nothing. On export, the frame disappeared. Only in the editor timeline did it flicker into view. The archivist kept a screenshot. When he showed it to a Vietnam veteran friend, the man reportedly went pale. "I knew someone who looked exactly like that. He died in '71. Some say it's just corrupted data. Others wonder if Deathdream isn't just about the dead returning, but about one that already had. Which moment in Deathdream unsettled you the most? The violence you saw, or the silences in between? Was Andy a monster or a mirror? Tell us in the comments which fact lingered with you, and whether you believe the frame that shouldn't exist was ever meant to be found. And if you know another film where the dead might not be acting, suggest it below. We're always watching.